Hello everyone, and welcome to Off the Cuff, where the headlines come to life. And today in the studio we have Dr. Gregory Barkley from Henry Ford Hospital. He is a neurologist and also the head of the cannabis department there. Welcome, Dr. Barkley.
Well, we really don't have a cannabis department, but thank you, Sahan. It's nice to be back again.
Well, we're going to talk about that. And you are absolutely no stranger to WDHT TV, so thank you for coming back. And there's a lot of things happening in regards to what we mentioned, the cannabis. But as a neurologist at Henry Ford, you have sort of charted different territories in terms of epilepsy and MS and what have you. What is your preferred sort of type of treatment for these kinds of afflictions that people have?
Well, I think that for any medical condition, one starts with standard therapy, and that starts with approved drugs and various other types of modalities. The good news about epilepsy is that we are on the verge of having a new prescription drug available, which is CBD, or cannabidiol, a cannabinoid from the marijuana plant. The drug has been studied now in 4 separate clinical trials in epilepsy in 2 separate syndromes. One is called Dravet syndrome, which is a genetic syndrome which is quite rare, but has a very famous patient named Charlotte Figi, who is the Charlotte of Charlotte's Web oil. And the other condition is one of the catastrophic epilepsies called the Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is characterized by intractable mixed seizures in most patients with often cognitive impairment. These are people who often have to wear helmets because they have drop attacks, which is the most dangerous type of seizure where they suddenly lose tone and fall to the ground. So there have now been 2 trials in each of these conditions. The company that's been performing the trials submitted the paperwork to the FDA in October, and 2 weeks ago the FDA's advisory committee, which is selected for each new drug application, ruled 9-0 in favor of approval of this drug. So now we're just waiting for the FDA to decide, and historically when a drug has been ruled unanimously for approval by the advisory committee, the drug is approved. So we anticipate...
But in this case?
Well, we all know that there are
a lot of controversies.
Political concerns about the use of marijuana by some individuals. So we have a conflict between the federal DEA ruling, which says that marijuana has no medical use, and now we have solid scientific data of 4 clinical trials using double-blind, placebo-controlled methods, which is the gold standard for scientific evidence, that show that it is an effective anti-seizure medication. So if science rules today, this drug will be approved and take its place amongst other anti-seizure medications for the use for people with epilepsy. If people who are anti-science or have another agenda rule today, then we'll still continue with this situation we're in right now.
And that's, you know, it's sort of a sad situation. I remember the last time you were here on the show, we actually had Zahra Abbas, who suffered from epilepsy, and I remember one of the defining moments of that show was asking her how long she had been on the cannabis treatment, and she said 2 years. And prior to that, she said she was having seizures maybe 2-3 times a month. And I had asked her, well, since you were on this, how many seizures have you had in the last 2 years? And she said 0. And that was something that really, really resonated with me, because if that is not something that can actually be a scientific, approach to finding if something is effective or not, I really don't know what is. And also we had Anquinette Thomason, who suffered from MS. And her treatment also, encompassed the cannabis as well, and said she was on a lot of her treatments. So I think that was the first time my eyes really opened to the fact that there are a lot of therapeutic advantages to the cannabis. So, and I look at that and I think, okay, so why is it so difficult, and why are we having such a hard time in creating these wonder drugs for people that are suffering from MS or epilepsy, and even for cancer patients? I hear it helps with nausea, it helps with all the different kinds of symptoms that they have. So why do you think we're having such a difficult time in making this something that's mainstream and something that is workable? I look at alcohol and I think it's a lot more dangerous, because when you drink alcohol, that is what impairs you the most when you're driving, and your judgment goes to the wayside. So I don't think that is the same kind of reaction that you have with marijuana or cannabis or what have you. So I weigh the two, and I'm surprised I'm even talking about this, because I've never tried it before. That's on my bucket list, but I've never tried it before. I've never been a proponent of it before until I really did the research and until I met you and really learned about it. So why is it so difficult moving forward? I guess there's a lot of people that were like me, and totally against it without looking at the results.
So I think that the drug has been used for 12,000 years as a medication, and it was on the list of approved drugs in the United States from 1850 to the 1940s. That list is called the USP, or U.S. Pharmacopoeia. You often see that when you buy products at the drugstore. It says USP such and such. Mm-hmm. It was known as the Indian hemp plant, or cannabis. And what happened was that politics reared its ugly head in the 1920s. There was a man named Harry Anslinger, who headed an agency that was the precursor of the DEA.
Yes.
And his job was to chase the drug that was illegal at the time was alcohol, and Detroit was ground zero for the smuggling of alcohol across the border. And so he realized in the late 1920s that the enthusiasm for prohibition was coming to an end, and he would soon have a whole group of men who had nothing to do. And so he would look for a new drug to take its place as an evil drug that he could keep busy trying to stop its importation.
We have to have a war on something.
Right. So he started writing these terrible racist writings about the evils of marijuana. Now, as I said, marijuana was known as the Indian hemp plant, or cannabis, and so nobody really knew what he was talking about, because at that time marijuana was a Mexican Spanish slang term for cannabis. So a law was passed in the early 1930s that said that marijuana was an illegal drug, and so that allowed Harry to go after people crossing the Mexican border, and so that was the first stage of the demonization of marijuana. That's where the movies like Reefer Madness came from. In the 1960s, the ante was upped by President Nixon on his war on drugs, which also had a lot of overtones against minorities, and so it's been demonized by that, even though it probably was used by more white people than it was by minorities all along. Nonetheless, the drug has had this 80-year or so period in which it's been said to have no medical use. Yet it has medical uses. It's been used for medical uses for 500 or 600 years in Western medicine for epilepsy, and long before that in traditional medicines in China and elsewhere. And in fact, there are even residues of cannabis found in some of the pottery shards that are in the Hopewell Mounds in Ontario, or in Ohio, and in some of the Indian archaeological sites in Ontario as well. So it's been, even though the plant is native to Asia, it's been used around the world for millennia.
It's really incredible, and I think that history really defines how marijuana became demonized, and I think it was really focused on a group of individuals, and so the concept of this is an illegal drug, this is something that is very dangerous for everyone, and especially you look at the statistics, and they say the younger generations are the ones that use it the most in terms of.
Right, which has it is a drug that has some dangers, though, and I don't want to minimize that.
Absolutely.
There have been lots of studies done that show that people who are intoxicated with THC, which is one of the
and that's what makes you high, the THC
THC
component.
is the cannabinoid that makes you high, and there are studies that show that people who are high on with THC have driving impairment, so there are safety issues on the road. There are safety issues in the workplace, and people doing jobs. You wouldn't want someone to come into the operating room to operate on you if they were high on
No, absolutely
THC.
not.
It has been shown in children and adolescents that THC impairs learning and concentration, and that so it isn't good for people in high school to be smoking marijuana or using it to get high, because it may have adverse effects on their learning and their school performance. It makes errors in judgment, and I would guess.
Is there a long-term effect on the neurological aspect of smoking at a younger age?
It's hard to tell. It's there. I would say that for most individuals, that the occasional use of cannabis is probably no more dangerous than the occasional use of alcohol. But that in individuals who, there's about maybe 5% or 10% of people who use cannabis who develop habit. The habit is more than a habit, it's more like an addiction where they have to use it, and it impairs their function on a daily basis. So I would say you can think about it like alcohol, that most people can use it without problems, but there is a percentage of the population where it is an issue. The CBD, the cannabinoid that doesn't make you high, is really being tested now scientifically only recently. The epilepsy trials have included some neuropsychological tests in these mostly children that have been tested, and it doesn't seem to have that same kind of problems with learning and memory. But we're only at the beginning of scientifically studying this. It is, I think, a beginning of a new era, because it's also the cannabinoid system is being used for study for many other scientific uses. The body has its own internal cannabinoids called endocannabinoids, which the prototype is called anandamide, which comes from the Sanskrit word meaning bliss. And the purpose of the cannabinoid system is to make us relax, feel at ease, digest, and sleep. So you can see there are a lot of positive qualities for that. And so it has aspects of relieving anxiety, relieving pain. It has, in CBD, anti-inflammatory effects, so it's being investigated mostly in animals right now in systems like inflammatory conditions like Crohn's disease. It's the CBD oil has been, some early studies have been looked at it for its anti-tumor effect. We already know that there are two synthetic derivatives of THC that have been approved for the treatment of nausea and vomiting and chemotherapy, and to increase appetite in people with syndromes such as AIDS, where they may have lost their appetite. Interestingly, in the doses used in the epilepsy trials, the high doses of CBD used, the children that were tested have had a decrease in appetite, so there has been some weight loss. So different cannabinoids can have quite different properties.
Now that's interesting. See, I don't, using this for a recreational kind of thing, I'm not really a proponent of that. Even with alcohol, anything that's excessive, that can really alter your sense of judgment, should not be something that you should be putting into your system. But you just said something interesting. I really thought that the therapeutic part was more the CBD aspect of cannabis, but THC is actually used in the therapeutic part of cancer patients and things like. See, I thought it was a totally different extract.
No, so if you think about the two cannabinoids, THC and CBD, you can really there are 3 kinds of plants, and they all vary in their ratio of these 100 or so cannabinoids.
Okay.
They've all been interbred, so there's no pure cannabis sativa or cannabis indica or cannabis ruderalis. They're all a mixture, just like every apple and tomato you buy is a hybrid of some sort. And so really the clear issue is if you have a dominant pattern or species, how do you characterize those? So I would say that there's 3 ways to categorize cannabis plants. Type 1 is a cannabis plant that is mostly THC as its dominant cannabinoid. That's the kind of cannabis that people would buy to go to a party and get high, for example. Type 2 is one in which there's more or less an even mixture of THC and CBD, and that actually is an approved drug in Europe and Canada. It's called the brand name is called Sativex. It's not available in the United States. It's actually made by the same company that is applying for the approval of the CBD oil, and it's used for pain and spasticity. So it is found that it's in some of the pathways of treatment for the treatment of MS in European standards. It's used for the other kinds of conditions in which there's neuropathic pain and or spasticity. The third category are the high CBD cannabinoid products, and we have this CBD oil that is on the verge of being approved by the FDA, and it can be bought and sold as hemp oil or hemp capsules here in the United States already.
So I do see some of the hemp products, even at the grocery store. They have the hemp seeds and all those things. Now, how effective are those in regards to consuming it?
So the hemp plant has many uses. The fibers make great rope. They can be used to make cloth. They can be used to make paper. There are actually some of the first paper, the first version of the Declaration of Independence was written on parchment, which is skin. But the copies that they made, some of the copies were put on hemp paper. So hemp makes paper, great paper, and through the fibers. So the Farm Bill was designed to promote those kinds of uses of it. It is a plant that has products that are high in various polyunsaturated fats, so you can go to the grocery store and buy hemp seeds to chew on, just like you can buy walnuts or almonds to eat for their beneficial properties and as for food value. And then you have all the medical aspects of it. So there are many uses to this plant.
So we were talking earlier in regards to the dispensaries that have been sort of popping up everywhere, and taking a chance basically that all this is going to move forward and be a positive kind of thing as an entrepreneurial movement. With the things that are happening now and the changes that are being made, what is your vision on all of that? Are these guys going to be in some trouble, or are they still on sort of solid platform?
Well, the state has set up a new panel to make rules. They've made rules, and they've now had applications, and they're working slowly through the applications to have people who can open or continue to stay open under the new set of rules. There is an interim, the rules went into effect in mid-December, and later this year, if you don't have a new license, you won't be able to remain open. So there is some uncertainty because they've been very slow in getting the cycle of approvals ramped up. So it's not clear if they're going to extend that interim period or not. I'm not sure how that's going to be handled, but they have a set of rules. They have a series of different kinds of licenses to define basically big growers or sellers from medium and small size, and there are different fees that they have to pay to be able to have their license. I would say that the biggest concern I have when people are taking this for medication is what exactly are they taking?
Right.
And I would encourage anybody who's thinking about using cannabis to make sure they have a product that's been tested at a high quality laboratory so they know what's in the product they're using. And plants can be grown under all kinds of conditions. Is the plant organically grown, or are there pesticides or herbicides there? Is there mold? You know, do you want to get something that's a bunch of old moldy plant that might have some dangerous compounds in there? If it's been extracted, has it been extracted through boiling basically an oil-water mixture, or has it been extracted with a method that uses harsh chemicals like benzene or gasoline or things like that? And if they did that, are there any of these residual chemicals there? So you want to know, if you're going to be taking a medication, what is in it. And so I would really want to make sure that the standards for the analysis are very tight, that the laboratories are of a high quality, that they use recognized laboratory standards. And when I spoke in front of the marijuana board, I actually encouraged them to make sure that there are clear and transparent rules about the testing of each of these products.
That's a bit scary. And you know, it's sort of a double-edged sword. You look at it where, you know, right now you have all these different dispensaries, and they're being able to function and supply this. But then exactly what you said in regards to knowing what the purity is and all the different, you know, things that could go wrong. So you almost think, okay, it needs to be regulated more. So, you know, there is a pharmaceutical company that can go in there and just say, okay, this is, you know, this is the process and this is the purity of the product. So it's almost a double-edged sword in regards to, you know, the process in which cannabis is, you know, given to the public. So, you know, what's your take on that?
Well, I'm an epilepsy doctor, and I see people all the time who say that they had seizures because they got switched from one generic to another, from the brand name to the generic. And they're very concerned about that, but shouldn't you have the same kind of concerns about going from, you walk into a dispensary and buy, you know, bag A this time and bag B the next time, and you really don't know what you're taking? I think if you're using this as a medication, you should make as sure as possible you know what you're using.
And how do you know what you're using? Like, let's say if someone wants something for, let's say, anxiety or depression. I mean, what do they go in and what do they ask for?
So I don't know if we know enough about the mixtures of various cannabinoids to be able to say that product A is better than product B for condition A, B, or C. So there is a degree of uncertainty. But what you do want to know is that if you were taking a certain dose today and you got a new batch for tomorrow's use, that you're going to take roughly the same amount of the same compounds tomorrow as you took today, so that you have the expected result you think you're having.
So we had talked about the earlier show that we did, and Anquinette Jameson, who you're very familiar with. And again, there was an aha moment during that show where she said she was on $90,000 worth of pharmaceuticals for her MS, and she ended up switching over to the cannabis and was taking that, and she's been able to walk and off her medications. Now, is that you know, a very unique kind of case, or is this something that MS patients could experience if they were to go the cannabis route rather than the pharmaceutical route?
Anquinette is not my patient, so I can't say anything about her medical condition. Even if she was my patient, I couldn't say anything about her medical condition.
Well, just from the conversation we had during the show and what she shared with us.
So what I recall that she said was that the prescribed medicine she was taking made her feel sick.
Right.
And that she really didn't like the way she was feeling, and that she feels much better using cannabinoids. Now, we know that some of the drugs that are used for the treatment of multiple sclerosis make you feel as if you have the flu. That's one of the side effects of some of those medications. So one could easily see how one would not want to take a medication that made you feel like you had the flu all the time.
Right.
The people who take cannabis products tell you that they actually either feel fine, or they sometimes, if it has THC in it, that makes them feel a little bit intoxicated. And to some people, that's a pleasant feeling, and others, they don't like that at all. There's a synthetic THC called dronabinol. That's the drug that's approved for cancer, nausea, and vomiting. And lots of patients don't like the way they feel. They feel it's a harsh effect, and they prefer the feeling they get when they use marijuana, because marijuana has a mixture of compounds. So there's probably something about the blend of different cannabinoids that have different properties that may make the experience more pleasant or unpleasant, depending on what that ratio might be.
So as a neurologist, would that be the route that you would recommend to someone that came in and said, that had MS and that was experiencing all those things? I mean, is that the route that you would recommend to them?
So I think that MS is a condition that has quite a variable outcome. If you take 100 people with MS today and you say, what are they likely to be like in 20 years? About a third of them will be still living with essentially no major change in their condition 20 years later, even without therapy. Another third is going to have a moderate effect from the disorder, and they will probably have trouble walking and may need to be in a wheelchair or something of that sort to get around. The other third has had a devastating course of disease, and they may even have died from the disease. And so you don't know when you're 20 years old and you get diagnosed with MS which of these groups you're going to fall in. And so that's part of the challenge of MS, is trying to decide, do I have a relapsing, remitting course that's going to be mild with infrequent flare-ups? Am I going to have a more progressive disease, or am I going to be one of those unlucky third that has a terrible course?
Right. Well, I think the conversation definitely continues. It's sort of controversial yet common sense on one end. When you look at the medical significance and advantages of utilizing this drug, which is basically not a drug; it's a natural kind of herb.
It is a drug. It is. It is a natural product, but it is a drug, and we have lots of drugs that were derived from plants. In fact, most of our drugs that we used started out as observation by botanists to say that this has been useful for one condition or another. So, the aspirin products that we use for inflammation are not much different than what the Native Americans found as useful when they had aches and pains.
Absolutely. So, it does definitely make sense to find out whether these kinds of medications create a less violent kind of approach to treatment. So I guess on that note, I think I'm sort of opening my eyes a little bit and really enjoying the research that I'm doing and educating myself in regards to this, because I think I was under the mindset of, oh my God, it's marijuana, it's a drug, it's terrible, it's ruining everybody's lives. And so when you look at it and you really start educating yourself and reading about the significance of this, it sort of makes more sense in regards to the movement going forward. And I just hope that the powers that be really see this and sort of put it in a form where it's not harmful and helpful in the medical industry. And I know that you're a pioneer in this.
Well, it's interesting, there have been studies that have looked at the use of prescription medications in states where marijuana has been made available as a medication or as for legalization. And each one of those states, Medicare and Medicaid prescribing rates have dropped, and the drop has been the greatest in the pain relieving quality drugs. And that in the state of Michigan in 2014, in the last year where this data was available, the state was saving more than $1 million a month on medication costs for Medicaid patients because of the use of medical marijuana.
And there you go. Dr. Barkley, thank you so much for educating us and giving us a different view on all of this. Thank you for
It's nice
being
to
here
see
once
you
again. And as these things change, we're going to be calling you again.
Okay.
Thank you, Dr. Barkley. And
Yep.
thank you all for being with us on Off the Cuff. Hope you got something out of this today. Have a great day.